Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us today, and thanks again to the organizers for having me. So this talk is titled Get to Know Rust. Oops, let me click in there. And what I'm going to be covering is the following that you see here. So just start with a quick introduction. Then I'm going to transition over to Visual Studio Code, where I will build, debug, and write tests for a command line interface app. And then we'll have some Q&A at the end, but also feel free to ask questions throughout. If there's anything that's not clear or anything that pops into your head, just feel free to pop it in the chat, and I will do my best to take a look at the chat and answer those questions. So the goal really is just to get more comfortable with Rust development and learn about helpful tools and strategies to write and test Rust apps. I'll start with a little bit of an overview about myself. So I'm a technical program manager at Microsoft. I've been in this role for going on about a year now. It's a very fun role because I have the opportunity to be a content creator. This is something that I was doing a lot of before, kind of on the side, not as my full-time job, but this is what I get to do now, which is very exciting. I focus on emerging technologies, which in itself is very broad. So I have a lot of flexibility and freedom to decide what type of topics and content that I want to create. And Rust has been one of those topics that I've been exploring and learning for the past year, so about the time that I joined Microsoft. And I'll talk a little bit more about my journey with Rust and what I enjoy about the language. But yeah, that's a little bit about me. So typically I create content in the forms of talks and presentations like this. I do some Twitch streaming, I create pre-recorded videos, write blogs, do other kinds of stuff. So really like all over the place with content creation. I'm also part of the Microsoft Reactors team. So this is typically, who I am creating content for. So Microsoft Reactors are worldwide communities of technologists. And you'll see there in the image that we have different locations around the world. But of course, since March of this year, we've fully transitioned to online delivery. So we've been able to offer regular workshops and live streams, typically 5 to 10 per week across a variety of topics. I encourage you, if you are interested in learning more, to go ahead and check out developer.microsoft.com/reactor. And we also have a whole bunch of past talks on youtube.com/MicrosoftReactor. Just recently, in the past week or so, we had a whole Rust week of talks. So I did an interview with a Rust developer at Microsoft, kind of talking about the language, why you would want to use it, what the benefits are, talking about some projects that are using it specifically at Microsoft and such. We also had a couple talks from Ryan Levick, who was at the speaker at the last meetup here, where he was doing a couple talks on kind of beyond Hello World, getting started with Rust, as well as kind of a deep dive into the borrow checker. So definitely encourage you to check that out if you're interested. And next, so what I like about Rust, I mentioned I've been learning Rust for the past, I guess, year or so. And what I like about Rust is that, there's a range of applications that you can build with it. It's, for web and systems programmers, you can build command line apps, WebAssembly, embedded apps, networking. So like the list goes on and on and on. And after I switch out of this presentation, I'll show crates.io, where you can kind of learn and see a lot more applications that have already been built that you can go and learn from and use yourself. It has a growing community and a passionate community of developers around the world. And I think this is really exciting. That's always, it's always very welcoming to join a project where there are friendly developers, people who just want to learn and contribute. And it's also been one of the fastest growing languages and rated, top on developer surveys like Stack Overflow and the GitHub survey, for example. So that's kind of, what interested me and wanting to start to explore Rust. It's also memory safe. So I think this is one of the main selling points about Rust, is that it guarantees that at compile time, your application is going to be safe from any possible null pointers. Rust does a really good job at making it difficult to leak memory. And kind of along the same lines of that is the compiler. So I think the compiler in Rust is definitely your friend, and it is super helpful to figure out where problems are happening in your app and get detailed error messages about problems that are happening in your app. So definitely, I think that is something that I really appreciate, and we'll spend time looking at that today. So the tools that I'm going to be using, I mentioned Visual Studio Code. I pretty much use Visual Studio Code for anything, especially anything coding related, but sometimes even beyond that. So highly recommend that IDE. I'm also going to be using the Rust Analyzer extension. And I'm also going to be using LLDB, which is a debugger for VS Code. And Rust Analyzer is going to help provide us with a little bit of language support, and I'll also demonstrate how that works momentarily. So now I'm going to transition over to the demonstration. And what I'm going to do is build a command line interface app to just generate a password of a provided length. So then after I write the app, I'm going to do some debugging and write tests, as I mentioned. And I just decided to start with a command line app. I think this is a great way to start to get, familiar with the language itself, so get familiar with the syntax and different things. And I think this is all just a great way to learn any language in general. So that's kind of where I've been dabbling in creating various command line apps. It's also nice because you can pretty much get immediate feedback. You can write something, go to compile and run it, and kind of see instantly like how things are working. So that's why I'm deciding to go in this direction. So let me go ahead now and transition over to start on that project. All right, so what I'm going to do is just begin at my terminal. And what I want to do first is use the Cargo package manager to go ahead and create a new project. So, sorry, one second, let me get back there. All right, so I'm going to first CD to my projects directory, where I just have all of my other projects. You don't actually want to see the contents of this, it's quite messy. And what I'm going to do is create a new project with Cargo called generate password, let's say GPW for short. And so I see that Cargo created this binary application package for me. So let's go ahead and then open this up in VS Code. All right, oops, sorry, 1 second. I actually needed to CD to that directory. And now let's open this up in code and not my whole projects directory. Okay, and while I do that, I also do want to make sure that I can see the chat in the background. And of course, I do encourage you to ask questions, so I'll try to keep that up. All right, so what I am given here, is in my source directory, I have this main.rs program. I also have a cargo.lock and that cargo.toml file for package information, as well as that's somewhere where I can store dependencies for my project. So I am going to start in the main.rs, but before I do that, I do want to remember to actually show the extensions that I was talking about before. So I mentioned Rust Analyzer. And you can just search over in the extensions bar if you want to get there and download this extension. We'll see how this works. I'm just kind of showing you how to get there. I'm also going to be using the code LLDB extension for debugging. So you can just type in LLDB. There's a variety of different ones there, or type in code LLDB directly to go ahead and get there. So now let's hop back over to the code, and I'm going to start filling in the contents of my program so that I can generate this password with a given length. So what I want to do right off the bat is be able to generate, or rather collect, command line arguments. And so what I'm going to do is use a crate called struct opt. So let me go ahead and show that, and I'll hop back over a little bit just to kind of show, crates I'm using, documentation, helpful things. This is also how I would just be developing on my own. So there's sometimes some context switching. So the crate that I want to use is called struct opt. And so struct opt, if I look at it, it's going to allow me to parse command line arguments by defining a struct. And what this does is combine CLAP, which stands for Command Line Argument Parser for Rust, with a custom derive. So it's basically just going to allow me to use a struct to collect command line arguments. And crates.io is very awesome. Usually you can get a lot of information about, how to include this crate in your dependency file, the cargo.toml, as well as just examples about how to use this. So let me go ahead and copy this over so that I can use it in VS Code. And then we'll hop back over there. Where did my VS Code go? Oh, full screen somewhere. There we go. Okay, so cargo.toml, I'm going to add this on line 10, struct opt is equal to 0.3. And let's go back up to the main program. And hopefully everyone can see this okay. No, there's not a lot here. Might as well just make it bigger. So I'm going to start on line 1 by saying use struct opt, : struct opt. And then following that, what I want to do is to hop down a couple lines. And what I want to do is start to actually define my struct. But first, what I'm going to do is I want to derive. So derive is going to basically allow me to use these different items or data structures. So I'm going to use debug. This is going to help me to actually be able to print my struct. And then I also want to pass in struct opt here as well. And then following that, I want to say, I want to go ahead and define my new struct, which is going to be called ops. And you'll notice even as I'm writing, and I'll call this out, like I'm kind of getting constant feedback. You just notice that there was kind of a underlined red here. You'll notice that even this definition up here, I kind of get some information about that, where I see that this is an unused import. So that is something that Rust Analyzer is really good at, is giving me lots of information there. And the argument that I want to collect is going to be for length. So what I can do and what struct opt allows you to do is basically just set different options for each of the arguments. So I want to specify a short option, which will be used if I type --l to use that option. I'm going to specify a long option of length. So I can use -length to use this option. And I'm also going to specify a default value, which is going to be, let's just say 12. This can be any default value of your choice. And following that, I actually want to specify the parameter that I want to collect. So this is going to be length of type usize. So here I just have this simple struct definition where I'm going to be able to collect the length. And then what I want to do is hop on down to the main function. And what I want to be able to do here is collect those command line arguments. So I'm going to say let, so define a new variable called ops is equal to ops : from _ args. And you see the Rust Analyzer helping me out a little bit more there. So from args is going to allow me to get the command line arguments from the struct. And immediately following this, let's just do a println. So I'm going to use that println macro, and I want to be able to print out the struct, and I can print it out like this. And then let's just go ahead and get ops. All right, and right off the bat, I just want to kind of run what I've done. So I'm going to open up my terminal down here. And what I want to say is cargo run. So I'm just going to run it. You'll notice that it's going to compile the different crates and the dependencies that I'm using. And after that, I'll see that it is running and that I get my ops printed out there at the bottom. So we just have that default of 12. I can also then test out how I can input the options actually. So let's go ahead and try out this short option of L. and let's say something like 30. So what changes there is that I now get a new length of 30. So that is not using the default, it's using what is defined through the command line. All right, I'm gonna keep going, check in if there are any questions yet. So next, what I want to do is start to actually kind of build out the function and the rest of the functionality to generate the password. So I'm going to say let length. So I'm just going to define a new variable called length is equal to ops.length. And then following that, I'm going to also define a new variable called password. And in this, what I eventually want to do is be able to call this function generate password, which I do not have yet. So I will get the compiler yelling at me, which I'll fix momentarily. And then after that, what else I would want to do is go ahead and print out the password. So I can just say password is, and just have this placeholder here for me to eventually fill out the password. Here we go. All right, so now right below the main function, what I'm going to start to do is actually define this generate password function. So let's go ahead and say fn generate password. It already kind of knows what I'm doing here. So that is going to take a parameter of length, there we go, which is type usize, and then it's inevitably going to return a string that we get back here when we call the function. Okay, so that's going to return a string like that. And then let me go ahead and start to fill in the contents of this generate password function. Before I do that, I just want to call out I am going to be using the rand library, or crate rather, to go ahead and generate random numbers. And just kind of giving an overview, I'm going to be generating random numbers, or rather kind of selecting numbers from a character set that I provide of all the possible values that we can use in our password. So let me just go ahead and switch back over to my browser and let's look at that crate. Okay, so I'm at crates.il looking at the rand crate. And just like before, I can see all kinds of information here. There's links to the documentation, which we'll probably check out just momentarily, because I think if I recall, there's not so many examples here, and I like to see the examples, but I do see how to use this in my cargo.toml, so I'll copy that for now. And just go in and check out the documentation. I also just want to call out that I think the documentation in Rust is usually fantastic. You can get lots of helpful information here. You can see different examples about actually how to use this crate and different modules and things that it provides. So yeah, I'm going to do something kind of similar to what you see here, but let's hop back over to VS Code so I can show that. And so if I go back over to cargo.toml on line 11, I'm going to go ahead and paste this rand crate. And you might even notice down at the very bottom of VS Code, and it stopped doing it now, but you'll notice that even as I'm writing code, the Rust analyzer is kind of doing things. It's kind of always checking. So what it just did basically was kind of compile this rand crate for me. So it's already aware without me even having to kind of go back to the terminal and use cargo compile, for example. So now first I need to start at the top of this program, and what I want to say is use rand, ::rng, the random number generator. I'm having some problems, so we will fix that momentarily. All right, so in the body of my function, I'm just going to close the terminal for now. Or minimize it. Okay, so what I'm going to do initially is I want to define a new mutable variable called RNG. And this is going to be equal to rand : thread RNG. Oops, already has that there for me. And after that, I am getting a little distracted by the error message, but we will figure it out. What I want to do next is actually define the possible characters that I can use to pick from randomly and generate this password. So I'm going to define a new constant using that const keyword, and this is going to be called charset. And charset it's going to basically define all of the uppercase letters, the lowercase letters, digits and symbols that I'm going to be using. This is going to be defined as a byte string literal, and I'll explain more about that momentarily. So that's going to be equal to this. And I previously wrote out these characters because I didn't want to type a lot of things here. So this is basically just going to indicate this B, and then within quotations, a byte string literal. And what this is needing here is a unsigned 8-bit type. And we're going to be able to pass that by reference. So I can say an U8 is going to be equal to this byte string literal. All right. And then I'm going to keep going here. So next I want to get to kind of the meaty part, which is actually going to allow me to cycle through, and for each of the characters in my password, I want to be able to randomly generate a character based on this char set. So I'm going to introduce this iterator, which is going to start at 0 and go up to the length of the password that I specify. And then I also want to use a mapping. So a map is going to basically produce a new iterator, which is going to allow me to pass in those values that I defined above. So starting at 0 up until 11 or whatever the length of the password is that I defined, but it is 12 by default. And then I can use this annotation to basically just say, I'm going to start to pass in, again, each one of those iterators. And it's going to get a little bit messy, but we'll get there. So that's going to, I want to define a new variable called IDX. And this index is going to call this gen range function. And gen range is going to be expecting a range from low to high. So it knows that it wants to generate this random number. It just is looking for a little bit of direction about what to generate within, the range to generate within. All right, and then what I want to do next is just for each of the indexes, I want to then map that to a character. And let me just finish this so we can get all that red out of here and it could look a little bit nicer, and then I will go back. So what this is going to do, and I'm going to shortly debug this so we can see exactly what's happening in here, is for each index, so starting at 0 up until the length of this char set, I'm going to pass in a different index. So eventually we're going to get as many indexes as the length as different characters. And then we're going to collect that. So we want to call this collect method. And if I hover over this, and you can hover over pretty much anything, the Rust analyzer will tell me lots of information about what this is, how to use something, provide me with some tips. So I see that this will transform an iterator into a collection. So collect is a common method that is used with an iterator, and this is just going to return me a collection. And if I'm looking through here, what jumps out to me is a string is going to be a collection of cars. So I am collecting all of these cars one by one up until the full length of the password that I want. And then I'm going to return that as a string collection. So then that satisfies this return type up here. And let's go ahead and try this out. Everything is looking pretty happy for now. So let's go ahead and try this out. Yeah, I was getting some output earlier about errors. So the Rust analyzer, again, is kind of always helping me out there. sometimes I just ignore them until I'm, ready. And as I'm kind of, still writing, I'll ignore them until I come back and have time to look at what I did wrong. So let's go ahead and just try a cargo red again. It's doing some more compiling. I get the ops printed out as well as, as well as the password that is generated here. So let's now go back up, and I actually want to go ahead and debug this. And we're going to debug, I'm going to set a breakpoint here so we can start to see specifically what's happening and what this IDX variable is kind of getting as we run through this iterator. I'm going to check if there are any questions. All right, and I don't think I see anything. So hopefully, I'm looking at the right channel. Yes.
Yeah, you're fine. We had one question in the Discord server, but another community member already answered it, so we are perfectly fine.
Okay. Okay, great. So then I'm not missing anything. Thank you. Okay, so I have set this breakpoint, and now what I want to do is go ahead and debug this. So if I hop over to the left-hand panel over here, there is this run option, which will allow me to run and debug. So let me just go ahead and select that. All right, cannot start debugging because,
Meaghan, you're currently muted. I'm not sure if you want to step. Give me a second.
Sorry about that. I can't unmute myself. Okay, so there was, I'm just getting some prompts basically that the LLDB extension is providing for me, that it's basically just saying I haven't set up any configuration to debug, and then it can do something for me where it actually provides this debug configuration automatically. You can set up specific configurations in here. I'm not going to show how to do that, and typically I don't need to set up any specific configurations, but that is an option that's available. So now let's go ahead and debug this. And I have, again, a breakpoint set here, so let's just go ahead and run. Oops. Okay, so now we see that the debugger has stopped at line 32 where I have my breakpoint. I can see some information in the top left corner about variables, anything that I want to watch. I can see information about the call stack and more. I think for now, let's just take a look at the variables that we're collecting. So this 0 is basically started here from this first iterator. And then as we would start to map through each one of those length items in the password, we can get more information. So on the next line, if I step over, I see that our index is 63. So this index is basically going to be returning me an ASCII value. So it's going to be able to kind of get the character in the character set based on that value. And let's see, if I were to go over this again, oh, I didn't want to go that way. Now, so, okay, I just continued playing. So it ran through that iterator once, and it stopped at the breakpoint again, and notice now that my local, the variable that I see here is 1. So it's basically, again, going to kind of keep cycling through up until the default of 11 for right now. So typically when I start to debug, it's, you know, as I'm writing applications and maybe before I've started to test, but it's going to kind of allow me to really see what's happening at different parts of the program, and then kind of make sure that I'm on the right track and confirm that I'm kind of getting the right values that I expect. So I definitely recommend using a debugger, and if you've used, you know, debuggers for any other programming language, this is probably very familiar with you. You can pretty much debug anything that you feel like debugging, but typically I'm using it somewhere where I want to learn a little bit more information. And I just, again, when I like know that something is working the way that I expect it to. So this will continue to cycle through. I'm gonna just go ahead and stop this for now. I see that the process exited. I don't see any other information there because I guess I just stopped it. But if I wanted it to run all the way through, I could do that and eventually see the output where I would ultimately return this collection of a string and then be able to print the password out. So that's kind of a little bit of an overview about debugging. We'll come back to that momentarily. I do want to move on and do a quick time check of testing. So let's go ahead and start with thinking about unit test. All right, and before I do that, there is actually something else that I want to do very quickly. But as I'm thinking about, you know, for now, this program is very short and sweet, but I might want to start to, you know, add more functionality. I might want to collect other command line arguments. Perhaps I want to specify what in the character set that I want to use, if I want to use, you know, uppercase, if I want to include symbols. So I can start to kind of collect a lot more information and just make my program more advanced. This is a very simple implementation that we just did. But I also want to think about how to kind of isolate and really have my main program focus on just the program execution, where I can have maybe some of the supporting functionality be moved to a library. So I do want to show that. And then when I move all this to a library, we'll go ahead and test over there. I'm going to remove this breakpoint for now. And so what I'm going to do inside of my source directory is create a new source file called lib.rs. And I'm going to go ahead and paste this function definition over here. I'm also going to need to use the rand crate over here. So I can go ahead and paste that. And then of course, now that I have moved this function over to a library, the compiler is having a hard time finding this generate password function. So what I can do is first just use the package name to call that. So the package name is GPW, the same name as my project. It's probably going to tell me an error that this is an undeclared type or module, but we will fix that momentarily. If I go back over to my library program, what I need to do is make this a public function because the compiler will complain that even though, you know, this library program and my main program are part of the same package, just the way that Rust visibility is set up, we need to explicitly make sure that we can access other library functions. So that should be fine now. And let's just try this out to make sure that everything runs as expected. All right, so it looks like it. I do still have this error here. Hopefully that little squiggly should go away sometime soon because it looks like it's working. Next, let's go ahead and finally start writing some unit tests. So the purpose of unit test is really going to be to test each unit of code in isolation from the rest of the code. So typically what you want to do is test each one of your functions. We only have one function, so this should be pretty seamless. And you want to kind of test to make sure that you're getting the right output. You want to test the happy path scenarios, which is just going to be the quickest case, like confirming that this function executes as expected. We also want to start to think about what could go wrong and test for that. So typically you want to put unit test in each file that they're testing. So this is my library file. So I'm just going to start adding the test immediately below that. And for now, I'm just going to use this test annotation to indicate that the function I'm going to write below this actually is a test function. So I can say function, and let's say test generate password length. That's fine. This won't take any parameters. And I also like to start my test functions with test, just to like further indicate that it is a test and identify that. So then what I can do is call the generate password function from within here. It is looking for a length. We can put something like 40. And then we can use an assertion. So let me step back just a moment. And you'll notice that as I started typing assert that I got suggestions like I've done previously. I wanted to call out specifically that Rust provides a couple of assertions that I can use as macros right off the bat. So this is very nice, as opposed to possibly having to integrate with some other kind of assertion library or framework like you have to do in other programming language. You can kind of get these simple assertions. So I have assert equal or not equal. There's also a regular just assert, so you can kind of put more custom assertions within that macro. But let's go ahead and just use assert equal for now. And what I can do is go ahead and say password.length. And I want to confirm that what I get from that function is what I expect. So then I can just pass in what the actual value should be, or the expected value. And then let's go ahead and try to run this now. So I'm going to go ahead and say cargo test. Let me bring this back up. Might be a little too big. Okay, so you'll notice here, this is our first time running test. Right off the bat, we were able to run one test, which is this test that I just defined here. Then there's also a couple other places where cargo is looking for tests. So here it's looking for test in my main program. And then I'm also looking for doc test. So doc test, hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to get to that. I think a really cool feature of Rust is that it does encourage documentation testing. So within any library or other program, I should think about including very detailed documentation, which is going to include examples and also test of how to use particular functions and other features. So that's a very cool. I think it also encourages folks to kind of keep their documentation up to date, since it is kind of a living part of your program. And when you actually compile the program, you'll know, like we see here, whether or not those tests are correct. So it does encourage folks to keep their documentation up to date. All right, so we were able to run that test. What else I want to show is I just am using this general test annotation and kind of this test on its own in isolation, but I can also think about creating a module for each test, and I can annotate that at the top of the module. I want to say CFG, which is this configuration check. It's particular for test. And so what this is going to do and what this will tell the compiler is to basically only compile the test when we're running cargo test and not when we're doing cargo run or compiling otherwise. And then I can define a module, which we'll just call test. And then within that, I can go ahead and include my test. And let's just try to reformat this. VS Code does provide nice options about like reformatting. I can't find that as of now. There's probably a shortcut I'm missing, but cool. We are able to now have our test inside of a module. And let me just go ahead and run this. And I can also click on this run test option to run the test from here. What happens now is I do get an error because generate password is not found in the scope. Now that I have a module within this library program, I still just can't access this function even though it is public. So something that you'll see generally used within a test module is this keyword use super, which is just essentially going to allow me to access and kind of inherit and use the functionality that's part of this library. All right, let's just try that again. Press any key to close, and let's go ahead and try cargo test again. Cool, and then that should have satisfied it. Sometimes I still get errors, but I think we're all good to go here. So that is something to keep in mind if you are using VS Code. It's always helpful to use kind of a combination of, Rust Analyzer helping you out, as well as the terminal and using cargo directly to run your testing programs. So that is a quick example of a unit test. And I think I'm just gonna have time to probably show a integration test after this. So let's go ahead and I'm going to create a new directory, a new test directory. So in Rust, integration tests are external to your library. So they kind of use your library in the same way, but you should think of integration test as first, you want to test that parts of your program can work properly together when integrated. And you also just want to test kind of assuming that you are your user. So however your user would interact with your program. So that's kind of more of a higher level where you're not thinking about testing each particular function, but more of the program as a whole. So let's go ahead and create this new folder, not in source, but I want to create a top level folder. Okay, there we go. It's outside of source now. So this is going to be called test, and that's just the general convention that you use. Within this test directory, I'm going to create a new file. And let's just go ahead and call this new file gpw_test.rs. All right, and so what I want to do in here is write a test that's essentially just going to test my generate password program, not function in particular, but more of the program. So there is a super helpful crate to use with this type of integration testing. And let me go ahead and show that. I'm going to go back to crates. And the crate that I'm looking for is assert_cmd. There we go. Sometimes this takes a minute. And so what this is going to allow me to do is simplify the process of testing my command line interfaces. So we can use it like this. So here's just a small example, trivial example, where we can define a CMD variable, and we use this cargo ben function to basically tell cargo to run whatever command that we enter here. And then it does this unwrap. So essentially unwrap is going to be looking for whatever the response is after we call this function. So whatever, if it's successful, if it's a failure, whatever other kind of information we might receive back, I will be able to capture there. And then we can do something like assert success or assert failure or assert other specific things. I just see the trivial example here. It might be helpful to actually look in the documentation to see some more detailed examples about how to use that. And it looks like there's some more detail here. So here's a little more detailed example about kind of how you can have a more complex test, testing different things and asserting different information. Cool. I will possibly come back to that, but now that I have copied the version of that crate that I want to use, I can just go ahead and paste it in my cargo.toml. And going back to the test directory, or the test program, at the top of my file, I want to use this assert CMD crate. and I want to use command. And then here I want to just use this test annotation. Something that I should call out is with integration tests that are already in their own test directory, you don't have to worry about using kind of that config command to specify that this is a test and kind of make it a specific module, because it is already in its own directory. It's pretty much only going to be run and compiled when you call cargo test anyway. So let's go ahead and write a quick test function so the test program executes successfully. And I'm pretty much going to do what we saw in the example. So I'm going to define a new mutable variable command. And I can say command cargo ben. So it's going to say cargo run and then whatever name we pass in here. And the name is going to be the name of our package, which is gpw.unwrap. And then I can say command.assert.success. All right, and then let's just try to run this as it is. It's doing some compiling and building. That will probably just take a moment because I have this new crate. This is also the first time running cargo run, or actually running the name of my package, GPW. So let's see, down here is where I can be able to see information about this test in particular. Something else we should try to do is, of course, write different tests. I don't think I'm going to get into very many more examples for now, but just you should also confirm that even your tests are working as expected. So it's helpful, you know, if you want to do something like test-driven development and maybe write a failing test first, or otherwise just want to know that your test can fail. I recommend doing that. So for example, I just changed the success to failure, and I can see that that does in fact fail my program because it was able to run it successfully. So I always recommend just either, you know, writing various tests and also making sure that your tests can both pass and fail so that they are valid. So that is a quick example of an integration test. And then I think for now, time permitting, I just did a time check. I think I'm at about 45 or maybe a little bit less, 35 minutes. So let me switch back over now to the rest of my slides. Now I'm going to show information where I kind of have a more complete demo and more examples of tests that you can check out. So where is that?
Meaghan, don't worry about the time. If you run over for a few minutes, that's absolutely no problem.
Okay, okay. I'm trying to keep a mental note, but so let's see. Playing from the current slide. So I do have this code up at github.com/Meaghan Lewis/password. This code is more complete. It has a little bit more examples, including kind of a more defined function for the generate password, as well as just other tests where I am kind of doing both more happy path and sad path. There's also an example of a documentation test. So I do recommend checking that out, as well as I just mentioned crates.io. And that's something that I didn't share before, but in crates.io, just the home page, you could get a bunch of information right off the bat. What I would recommend checking out is just popular categories. Again, there's such a wide range of applications where there's command line utilities, development tools, web programming, and so on. You can kind of just come and check out a bunch of crates and learn from them and extend them. And I think that really helps to start become a lot more familiar with the language itself. So recommend that. I'm gonna go back to my PowerPoint. And then I also just wanna make a call out for the Microsoft Austria workshops. So this is kind of the local workshops, you know, specific to your area that are not happening in person, but there are a lot of different online workshops focusing on cloud transformation in different areas like infrastructure, data, and analytics. And you can find out more at aka.ms/discoveraustria/Azure. So there are, I think, a variety of workshops that are offered on a weekly basis and various topics, of course. So encourage you to check that out. And then finally, I just wanted to leave my contact information. So I left my email, my LinkedIn, and my Twitter. I'd be happy to connect on either LinkedIn or Twitter, or if you have any questions or follow up and just want to chat, you can email. And I think that is about everything for now. So let me check what kind of questions there are.
Meaghan, thank you very, very much. Thank you for this great presentation and kudos. I am a presenter myself and I know that you have to be very, very brave to do so much live coding. So really awesome. We have one or two questions, especially here on Discord. People were chatting a lot about what you showed, and even some guys said, "Hey, I didn't know this, great," and so on. So really great presentation. One question that came up is you were using the Rust Analyzer, which is an I think alternative language server for Rust. Is there a specific reason why you didn't use the official Rust one, the one that Visual Studio Code automatically suggests?
Which is, I'm assuming, RLS, right?
The second one on the left-hand side, yep.
Oh, okay. So, I mean, I've just heard great things about this extension in particular. I think, I recommend trying them out. You'll notice that I do have this extension installed. That's kind of my process personally, is like trying out different extensions. I think
Absolutely.
You'll often find that there might be very similar extensions that kind of provide the same help and functionality. This is just one that's kind of highly recommended, even from folks at Microsoft using this. So this is something that I end up using pretty often, and I do find it really helpful.
Very interesting. I will definitely check that out. But
it's a personal choice.
Yep. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll definitely try that out. And then we had a short discussion. I think it was in your lib.rs on GitHub. I just checked it out. It was in line 13. I can't remember what it was here. Little bit up, I think. Yeah, here it is, line 7. People are asking why you are specifically using a reference to an unsigned 8 here and not just using a reference to a string. Is there a specific reason? Is it necessary for your code, or any comments on that?
Yeah, so the question is why okay, let me try to repeat the question. I think there are a couple different things. Why I'm using kind of the unsigned 8 character or constant rather than just making this a regular string, and just why it is that type in general. So I wanted to just make this a constant set of characters, and really why I ultimately wanted to do that. Yeah, I'm going to start there and then come back. What I ultimately wanted to do that was kind of to do this mapping using these iterators to kind of map over each one of the characters. That was just kind of an implementation that I chose about how to do this. So I'm kind of using this iteration of characters, which is ultimately going to return a collection of strings. I think we could have tried out using something different, honestly. I also had to define this as a unsigned 8-bit type because that is basically what this const is going to expect with the value that I'm providing, which is this byte string literal in this way. So that's at least why I'm using the type. Yeah, I could have chose to do something differently. It just seemed like a reasonable choice at the time, and kind of being able to, again, like iterate over each one of these characters. And then this collect is specifically returning a collection of strings based on characters.
Thank you very much for elaborating about that. I think that describes how you, why you went for that. And also in the Discord server, some other members of the community posted some links to the documentation. For those of you who were asking this question and you want to know more, check out our Discord technical discussion channel, and you will find some people there who posted interesting links on that topic too. So let me quickly check the Discord server. I think, yeah, we have people saying, thank you for the great presentation. Very interesting. Thanks, Meaghan. These messages coming in, but I don't see any technical questions anymore. So Meaghan, thank you again. Thank you very much for being our guest here at the Meetup Linz. You visited now Austria, at least virtually. If you ever come to Europe or Austria, get in touch with us. We would love to have you in person in a meetup at some point in the future.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and just appreciate you all listening.